This is Hunter Muse.
And this is Chris Snipes, and you are listening
to The Melt.
Anybody from there.
I was born in West Covina, California, and my father was a professional wrestler, and so I lived all over the United States. But when I was, kind of early elementary school, we moved to Kansas City, and there for about 10, 12 years. And then as I got older, I traveled around a lot more, and then was living in California when I reconnected, met Chris, and then I came back here and moved here from California.
Interesting.
And I've always been
quite a change.
Yes.
Would you say
wild.
That's quite a change? Yeah.
Well, I mean, because that means you do know the difference between city and country living. And that's important because I think that's one of the divides in our culture. It isn't just a left and a right thing. It's actually city and country. And I'm sorry to say that, it probably do people a lot of good to have experience of both environments. And I did after I went to college. Well, when I went to college, I was in Sonoma County, which is up north of San Francisco. Then I lived in some other places like Arizona. And I would say that, I actually feel more at home in small towns. Cities are kind of isolating, just in general. I've gotten good at solitude, so it doesn't bother me quite so much. But earlier in my life, it definitely, I think I had more issues with loneliness back then than I do now. And thank goodness, because, the last few years, especially 2020 to 21, were pretty rough.
Yeah, exactly.
And I honestly don't know if we're ever going back. Was there ever a normal to begin with that we're ever going back to? Honestly, I don't know.
It's so funny that you mentioned that, Wayne, because Chris and I were actually just talking about this right before we got on the show. I had a very different experience. I lived in New York for 10 years, and I was quite charmed and amazed at how in the city I found a community that was extremely close-knit. And even commuting, I would see the same people on the train every day. And I had my bodega that I went to, and I had, they extended me credit sometimes when I didn't have cash. So I had very much a small town experience living in New York City. And part of me thinks that there was more of a forgivingness of people's plights or their situations in a big city compared to a small town where people tend to be more suspicious if you are a newbie and an outlier. They don't really know who you are. So it takes some people in small towns a little bit longer to accept new people, where in New York, it's so transient. You're used to seeing lots of people flowing in and out of the city.
Yeah, I would say that it's a very mixed bag. Certainly, one advantage of the city is that, in general, is that you do get exposed to more variety, and then and the difficulty can come in if people develop a sense of superiority because of feeling more sophisticated, for instance, which sometimes you get that with, and that goes in with our class divisions, which I think are not really acknowledged in this culture. They are more so in other countries where they're much, in Britain, for instance, they're much more aware of class distinctions, and they're, it's like this cross they have to bear. Nobody really likes it. I mean, maybe it sort of works to the advantage of the, let's say, the owning class. Even they're not really happy. I mean, if you've known rich people, they're really, they might have all kinds of goodies, but they're not really necessarily better off. And indeed, part of what makes dystopia what it is that even the people who are running things aren't really getting true happiness. They're just, they're just, and unfortunately, it just spills over. The control trips just make more people miserable. That's so. The irony here is that where I'm at right now this is like the heartland of cyberpunk dystopia, and all the oligarchs are here. Elon Musk. I don't know if he still lives here, but his headquarters is just that away. You only have to go about a mile, and you're right in the thick of downtown. And the mood changes very dramatically once you get. Do you know San Francisco's geography, the layout?
Yes, very well.
Yeah, because I don't think you can. I don't know if you can even see it from here because the light balance, the camera tends to white out as you look out the window. But the Transamerica Pyramid and downtown, it's all that way. I could just walk right down the street, which is, this is pretty decent. I don't know how long I'll get to live here. I mean, it's, I've been here after I've been out. When I came back, that was to live and work here. I was about 20 years ago. And prior to that, I was in Santa Monica when I was, in my showbiz period. I was actually an actor in film and TV, and trying to break in as a screenwriter. And in fact, most of my writing for the last 25, almost 30 years now, it's been screenplays mainly. So I've only recently switched to regular narrative, like short stories. The one thing I'm working on right now could turn into a novel. It depends upon, I'm trying to start out small because this is relatively new to me. I want to get the hang of it. But at least the ideas are worked out, because this is actually the story. The Reality Benders is a prequel to a screenplay that I wrote in 2016 called Epiphany. And that is, in hindsight, I would say that was an example of science fiction that was kind of prescient. I wasn't, back in those days, talk about how different the world was. This was before Donald Trump was even taken seriously as a candidate. Can you imagine just how long that feels like? A long time ago, doesn't it?
Pre-Donald, yeah.
Yeah. And at the time, I was actually, my scenario, which is near future, could have been, I was thinking about just, a few years down the road. And indeed, a lot of the stuff, the social divisions, the tendency towards extremism on all sides seems to have come to pass, but not in quite the way that is in the story. What is happening in Epiphany and the Reality Benders could be considered the universe next door, not the one that not what I hope we will experience, just another version, let's say. And for entertainment purposes. It has to, I don't want it to be too hopeless. It's just going to be a different kind of dystopia. And then the thing that I hope will distinguish these stories is that I'll eventually find a way out of dystopia, and hopefully in a way that people can believe in and possibly even draw hope from. Certainly, I don't know if you and people have had a kind of intuition that something big is coming soon. Mm-hmm. So there's a sense of I'm not saying necessarily impending doom, but certainly there's a sense that things are coming to a head, and that we could be facing, if not at very least, we're kind of like an end of empire. The end of empire phase is not the same thing as an end of civilization phase.
Exactly.
I wouldn't exclude the end of civilization scenario. There's things that seem to be global, not simply national, going on here. And when and in the screenplays that I write, and in the story I'm writing now, there's this undercurrent of what you might call the hidden world, the world that's behind the curtain, and people might have conspiracy theories about this. And I've been immersed in all the same stuff that even before the X-Files became a thing. There was like this entire subculture that was developing in the background for decades, and that's the reason why X-Files was a hit, because that subculture already existed. And we were totally primed for it. And the interesting thing is that in the recent decades, and when I say recent, I mean in the last 30 years at least, take the long view, even though I'm not that old. I take the view that among the social divisions that seem to characterize our era is that the so-called left has gave up on conspiracy theory quite a while ago. Whereas the right, the so-called right, seems to still have a keen interest in it.
Exactly.
And I ask myself, why is that? And I suspect that during the 60s, when John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy were all assassinated, it was such a traumatic shock to the entire public. And that's probably the last time that people on the left and the right were willing to consider conspiracy theories. They took that, there's plenty of people that I knew who, there's one fellow who's passed away, unfortunately. He was really seriously interested in JFK assassination theories his entire life. And and the fact that nothing came of it, that there was no closure, that nobody who was responsible was ever brought to justice, I think that kind of broke everyone's brain. They just couldn't handle it anymore. That's my theory anyway. And so,
That's freaked me out, because as you were talking, I feel like we did like a mind meld. I think that at that point we could put a pin in history, and that's what really broke America's heart, was when John F. Kennedy was assassinated. And you can kind of dial that forward to 2001, and that was the next moment that really broke this country apart. And I feel like there are traumatic moments that we can look throughout our history that have happened, that it becomes this cognitive dissonance where the country becomes bifurcated and there's two different tracks the country has gone on. And it seemed like 2001 was another one of those moments. I was actually living in Los Angeles when that happened, Main Street, Santa Monica, at Ashland and Main Street. And you saw that happening there, where people recognized the world that we lived in pre-2001 was never going to be the same.
Yeah, yes, I remember it well too, because certainly people reacted. That was the intensity of the reaction gave me the feeling very early on that there was some kind of psyop going on. That certain people picked up immediately, almost on the first day, that something was fishy about the way things were unfolding. It was almost too neat. Everything, the passports being found and the culprits being fingered almost immediately, and then all of the wheels started turning. Like, oh, here we go, we're off to war again. Okay, so that was, it was just, and indeed, there were so many things about the nature of the event. It was almost like a, what I would call trauma-based mind control en masse.
Totally.
For sure.
Totally.
If we're talking about, talk about things in terms of, I did a little series in my blog about the mind control, all the different techniques in the research projects. Everybody knows about MK Ultra, of course, but honestly, by now we should come up with a new term, because historically speaking, MK Ultra is boomer mind control. Okay, that dates back to the 50s and 60s. That's Sputnik era. Okay, we're way beyond those days, with Dr. Delgado with his remote control. You probably did, you know about Delgado and those brain implants? That was very old school, analog tech. Yes. Yeah. The remote control stopping the bull.
Yes.
Yeah, and we're generations beyond that now. And one of the reasons I put this the series on mind control in the blog is because I was doing research for the stories I'm writing, because I figured, okay, things must have moved along. What would be plausible to put into a near future scenario, taking into account what's possible? And it turned out there's a lot going on. And it's a lot of it's out in the open too. It's not even as hidden as it was back in the days when people were getting dosed with LSD without their knowledge. It's different than that now, because now we have brain research for ostensibly very noble purposes to cure diseases and make crippled people walk again. All these things that are perfectly legitimate. And at the same time, they also have other applications. It's impossible not to notice that if you are able to control parts of the brain, and then you're opening the possibility of other types of control. And it's just a question of who's got the control, and if you've got projects where DARPA is a major investor, well, that should be a signal. I mean, that ought to be a flag. I think that the CIA is no longer as directly involved after what happened. They got exposed in the 70s, and I think that after that it's probably safer to let DARPA handle that stuff. They're already those are scientists anyway. They ought to be, and they should make it look legitimate, so that
well, now it's tech companies. Now it's Apple. Now it's Meta. So these companies, I would say that they're probably the primary contract holders for DARPA. So that now they don't need to use. They're using EMFs. They're using the cell phone. People are basically handing their sovereignty over to governments, just for likes.
And pharmaceutical companies, they're taking it on a chemical, physical level.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I don't know how much of that the mind control series that you read, because it goes into the different tracks of research and how these intersect with high-tech research into computers and AI, because they're all related, especially because the vast amounts of data that have to be processed in brain research can only be done with extremely advanced computers that run much faster than the ones that we have today. So the two tracks are feeding each other. There's a synergy involved where, and if you get faster computers helping the brain research unlocks new ways of designing computers, because there are new computer architectures in the pipeline, only one of which is quantum computers, which we've all been hearing about for 20 plus years. I'm starting to wonder whether that's actually a scam, because really, how many years and how many billions of dollars do you have to put into this before you see some practical results?
Exactly.
There are other kinds of computer designs that might pan out sooner, actually, at the rate things are going, that are meant to mimic the structure of the human brain. And so a lot of now what you might find with Western scientific research generally is that it tends to be reductive, trying to split things into finer and finer pieces. And so now we're even beyond the level of looking at how neurons fire. I mean, it's been well established for a long time about how neurotransmitters cross the synaptic cleft, and you get these what you might call these little lightning bolts, you might say, arcing across our brains.
Right.
Well, and it's really quite wondrous. And yet there is still more to it. And even the very paradigm of thinking of the brain as a computer could actually be incomplete at best. The notion that this thing in our head is a thinking machine is really, it just happens to be, is really, I think, not doing it justice. That, and especially if we don't fully understand what consciousness is. And there are materialist assumptions behind the notion that the brain produces consciousness.
Exactly.
Because I know there are other ways of looking at it. And in the stories that I intend to write, I'm going to be exploring that topic, not directly, but as a matter of course in the proceedings. It will come out that I look at consciousness as a non-local phenomenon, as it is, and that consciousness precedes the physical universe. It's basic. You could call it Neoplatonism, and that's okay. There's other ways of describing it, but the alternate view, which I believe is the dominant paradigm right now, is that matter, for which came into existence for no apparent reason, spontaneously organized itself into forms, which then produced consciousness, which then is capable of apprehending the material phenomena that brought it into being. And I think this is kind of backwards. But one of the things that I also explore in the blog that might be of interest is reality mapping.
Yes, I definitely want to get into that.
That's basic. It's basic philosophy. And one of the trends that I've noticed, and I'm sure you and everyone has noticed it one way or another, is that there's been a breakdown of consensus reality. And last few decades particularly, and it seems to be that it's not coming back. That's one of the the old world that we grew up in is not coming back, and the notion that people can be on the same page about just basic assumptions about what is real, I don't think that's we can't assume that anymore. And in fact, I'm starting to now wonder whether it's even necessary at this point. It might actually, it might be that there are different ways of looking at this. Now, I can understand, and I've been looking at trends on social media, for instance. There are subcultures that are interested in finding ideas from the past, old ideologies or old religions, in a sense, digging through the rubbish of the past century or so to find something that feels solid, that they can believe in, because clearly where they're at right now is not satisfactory. And that, indeed, this whole postmodern world we live in is really not satisfactory for a whole lot of people. And it's completely natural that people would be looking to the past, wondering, did we take a wrong turn somewhere? Should we, and then the question becomes, how far back do you want to go? Shall we go back to before women had the vote? Is that far back enough? Should we go back to when there was no separation of church and state? Should we go back to monarchy? Was democracy the wrong turn? And some will honestly go back to the Enlightenment and say that that was where we took the wrong turn. That would be conveniently forgetting that the Enlightenment arose as a reaction to the abuses of power by the monarchies and the church.
Exactly.
Or churches. And it was inevitable that reaction would have to happen. And it has, and I cannot deny that we've enjoyed some progress since then. I don't think that I would be in any way nostalgic for living in the world 200 years ago, let alone not even 100 years ago. I wouldn't be very content there either. A lot of people would consider that dystopia just an older, the steam-driven version of, and I just go, well, and also, if you were to have a reset philosophically, would that simply be buying some time? Would you not eventually come back here again? How would you have the outcome different than it by doing it, having this redo of, of whatever it is, whether it's Christian orthodoxy or monarchy. Actually, when I used to joke that in my more cynical moments, when I'm when I'm optimistic about humanity, I'm an anarchist, and when I'm pessimistic about humanity, I'm a monarchist, and that I think really, and that actually fits. A lot of people can completely understand where that's coming from. You do have to be, and I have had periods in my life when I have taken anarchism seriously as an ideal.
Sure.
But then recognize, it is an ideal because it would appear that the majority of people aren't ready for it. And I don't know if they can ever be made ready for it. This is the thing about, and indeed, the idea of democracy requires a certain optimism as well, because you have to believe that people are capable of self-governance. And it may be that not all people everywhere at all times are capable of it. And
nor do they want to be.
Nor
do they want to be. Yeah. They don't want to take care of themselves.
Yeah. And So
well, and we don't live in a democracy. We live in a constitutional republic.
Yes,
so
certainly there's a delegation of power. That's
right. But I think one
that
thing that we have to consider, Wayne, is the population. Because I think that what the shift has happened with us is that we now have adopted a global view of the world, where 200 years ago, you weren't really concerned with what was happening across the pond because you may not be communicating with people that were living in Ireland or England or in Africa. So you didn't really know what was happening to the same degree that we know now. So I think one thing that's influencing kind of this dystopic perspective of the world is we have more information access, but we have less control.
That's a good observation. Yeah. Yeah. Well, certainly there's one of the things I noticed because, well, partly because in a sense, I'm a cultural worker, having as a writer, and I would say that one of the curious trends is that there appears to be, I'm not going to say definitely, but there appears to be a trend of increasing what I'd call I don't know, I would hesitate to use the word decadence. Increasing, but decadence does apply to certain periods when you can see the moral character. You might say that sounds like an incredibly old-fashioned term, but there's a thing about the character of the people, that they seem to be more coarse and more vulgar than previous generations, and it may be that this might be deliberately encouraged. There might, and it would not surprise me. And I'm certainly, if you have been hanging out with those who've been in contact with Hollywood, you might get the feeling that there are some genuinely sinister people running that industry.
Yeah,
and certainly there have been rumors for a long time about, for instance, the Disney company, and as well as the other major studios, and the music industry as well. And you get the feeling like, wow, well, okay, are they all run by satanic pedophiles? I don't know. Certainly there are people who will do whatever is necessary to get ahead. And that mentality alone tends to drive things towards pandering the lowest common denominator. And then that becomes this self-perpetuating cycle. It might not even require any kind of diabolical plot orchestrated from the top of some power pyramid. You just let market forces do the work. You know, I mean, if you have something that is when the more millions of dollars get invested into a tentpole movie, for instance, the more everyone involved is inclined to take the least creative risk.
Yeah.
To do whatever seems to have worked before, and then that increases the trend towards mediocrity.
Yes.
And it's almost like you have to look harder I have to look harder than I used to find anything truly innovative and original coming out of Hollywood, because the stakes are too high now. Once you've got people who are now looking at this movie has got to make 200 million at least, and it's, otherwise you're not even going to break even. When you're at that point, how do you get anything truly? How does creativity even work its way through that?
Yeah.
You really to me, it only really happens at when everything is very small scale, where the amount being gambled is small enough that people are willing to take chances on it. And thank goodness there are still people out there doing that. And for me, though, I'm done with Hollywood in the sense that I've been hitting my head against the wall for many, many more years than perhaps I should have. I don't know if you've known people who are been in the industry.
I worked in that field, and I do want to touch on that point, because I think Hollywood is dead. I think it died a long and painful death that really started, you could say, kind of around Pulp Fiction, around that time period.
Okay.
And what has changed now is streaming services. So if you want to make a Hollywood film, then you're going to have to go into the formulaic route. You're going to have to rehash a Marvel film. You're going to have to rehash a Star Wars film. You're going to have to kind of buy into that reality. But what's interesting about the streaming service world is now anyone can make a film. You can't necessarily make a Hollywood film, but look at someone like Greta Gerwig. What they've done with her is that they choose one person and say, okay, this is the person we're going to prop up, because this person fits into this criteria of woke or left-leaning or whatever the agenda is. So that's going to be the person that we prop up to make us look like we are progressive and we are kind of on the cutting edge of filmmaking. She's a woman and she's young. But if you have good content, there are myriad places that you can put that content now. I think the difference is that some people want to make films and make art, and some people want to be famous. So I think it depends on which camp you're in. If you want to be famous, then you're going to drink the adrenochrome and you're going to be part of the satanic cult, and you're going to be that soulless creature. If you want to make film, all you need is an iPhone now and a YouTube channel, and you can make a film and you can put it out there, and someone will see that. So I think that's kind of where the fissure between Hollywood and art has been created. What do you think about that? Are you still interested in making films, or are you interested in making blockbuster movies that are Hollywood propelled?
Well, at this time, because I like the idea of having creative control, I've decided I'm going to focus on getting short stories and novels published. And then if there's enough interest, those could be adapted. Then that means that the written stories serve as the previous IP, and hopefully will allow it to maintain its integrity as if it gets adapted into things like graphic novels or films, TV shows. I'm all in favor of I still think like a screenwriter in the sense of trying to work out a story visually. But now I have the luxury of being able to write about a character's inner states much more than I used to. It's a strangely liberating experience. Although I have to say that I also, there's a certain effort involved in writing a book that I'm not used to. In that you have to fill the page with all this prose, and you have to make it, you tailor it for a general audience, which is different from tailoring it for a script reader or a director or an actor. It's a screenplay can be much more like a blueprint of instructions. Everybody understands that format, and but you can't really write that way for the general reader. You're trying to create pictures in someone's head and have them feel the feelings ideally. And I like the process. I think that, when I look at the role of creativity in my life, in conjunction with the philosophizing, the reality mapping, I can see that these are both essential processes. I think about what's the nature of reality, what's going on here, what is our life about, and at the same time, the creative process allows me to explore those questions, and it's kind of like what Philip K. Dick was doing with his stories. And I've been reading some of his interviews, and also I've seen some of the ones that were filmed.
Mm-hmm.
And I realized his creative process became more aware as he grew older. When he first started out, his 20s, I don't think he was fully conscious of all of the synchronicities and the metaphysical themes that he was exploring.
Mm-hmm.
And there are things that, if you look back at his early work, some of it is kind of astonishing, because he was having these flashes of insight that make you almost think that he was remote viewing another timeline.
Yeah.
Wow.
He wasn't just making this up, is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Think about it's almost like a shamanistic vision.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm floored by it, because I do get that. I know what that feels like.
Wow.
And the act of creativity is, well, to use a term that he had actually started using later in his life, it's negentropic, or negentropy is reverse entropy, just like the creation of life. Life acts to create order out of chaos, whereas entropy is order degenerating into chaos. So there are two processes going on at the same time, and creativity is negentropy. That's a good thing. I mean, you can't really have just one. You have to have both. This seems to be the nature of the world, is that it seems to run on polarities in many different ways. And I'm learning gradually how to build that into my reality map. When I talk about reality map, the nature of it is how it differs, I think, from a lot of philosophy and theology has tended to calcify into what I call tribal thinking, whereas reality mapping is meant to change over time, because one of the things that, well, I grew up Catholic. I don't know if you grew up in a religious environment, either of you, but it's certainly now there are people who can come to a spiritual point of view later in life, even though they didn't grow up with a spiritual tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And vice versa. People grow up in a religious household, and then they reject it.
Mm-hmm.
Or people go back and forth in the course of their lifetime. And I seem to I have had this kind of circuitous journey, you might say, but mainly away from organized religion. And part of the thing that made it unpalatable, and it wasn't just the doctrines of the Catholic Church or the fact that it was a corrupt institution, long before I was born. The problem really is that it resists being updated. It doesn't really want it believes all organized religions and political ideologies do not admit error. They don't want to be updated. They don't want to be modified, and they are defining themselves by what they are not. And every time they confront a different point of view, the immediate instinct is to find fault with the other, to try to prove that one's own beliefs are the correct beliefs and the other guy is wrong.
Yeah.
And this becomes really a lot of the time that becomes really quite pointless. If you ever try to see some like, a Christian debating an atheist, I mean, to me, that's a complete waste of time. They're not even on the same page as far as basic assumptions about reality. Why would they even bother? You know, because each one of them is going to try to tear the other down. They're not even interested really in comparing their points of view to see, is this person possibly right about something? Did I miss something important here? Exactly. No, they're not even interested remotely. They're not remotely interested in that. And that just drives me nuts. So I just prefer to look at reality mapping as a way of approaching this in a more pragmatic way, even though you can get very metaphysical, and I do with my own. I'm not even trying to sell anybody my own reality map, because it's much more satisfying to create your own, because then you start to examine your axioms, the assumptions that are underpinning your worldview. And then you go, okay, yeah, I mean, then you can even confront the contradictions, which sooner or later, you'll probably find something that you just go, well, I know that that's non-falsifiable, and maybe it's irrational, but it works for me. And then, but at least you know that. You're not going to try to kid yourself or anybody else about that. I mean, I could say, well, yeah, I'm a certifiable loon, and yeah, some of the things that I've believed might be completely indefensible and completely unscientific, but oh well, but we could agree on some things. There are certainly, but like one of the things that I mean, like I said, I don't want to sell my own point of view. It just happens that but reality mapping is an activity that really anybody could learn. I mean, goodness knows, thousands of years ago, back in ancient Greece, ordinary guys were doing this. You don't have to have a college education. You just have to be curious and just have a few basic pointers about how, maybe it helps. Maybe it looks, to me, it might look basic, but only because I went, had some schooling. That kind of helped. It wasn't just the Catholic schools, although that helped. Ironically, it's one of those situations where I went to a Jesuit high school and became sufficiently well informed to lose my faith. So it wasn't exactly, it probably didn't turn out the way they had intended, but leaving the church at 16 was probably exactly what I needed to do. And then I got into a lot of what I'd call, new agey modes of thinking, because that was in fashion. We're talking about the late 70s and 80s. Mm-hmm. And it's also Northern California. We're just about the flakiest people in California. and I didn't even claim, I still don't claim to be any intellectual. I'm just, I just happen to have had some interesting influences, I guess. And, but I did, at least in college, I did learn critical thinking, and in fact was a teacher's assistant for the Department of Philosophy. And that helped a lot. I didn't even realize at the time what a difference that would make. That my professor, Richard Paul, was one of the leading authorities on critical thinking, and he was very much in favor of it becoming part of the curriculum everywhere. And I'm sorry to say that I wish it had become more widespread. Yes. We could use it now. I mean, we're goodness knows, just being able to have, for people to have a nice civilized conversation about what's true and what's real that's really becoming difficult now. It shouldn't be. It should be the easiest thing in the world to you should be able to hang out with anybody anywhere, and not have to worry about feeling like you're suddenly going to have to defend yourself because it's like somebody might peg you as like the enemy. It's like because you.
Yeah.
And it's like, hey, wait a minute. We're just trying to figure out, can we just try to figure out what's going on here?
Yeah.
Maybe, put our heads together, we might be able to get somewhere.
Build some bridges.
This is what I love. I'm in university right now, and I'm taking a cognitive psychology class. And just to kind of circle back to that discussion about consciousness, I am utterly fascinated by the fact that in 2023, we are still having the discussion about the nature of consciousness and what that is. So I just did this assignment, and we had to look at it from 5 different perspectives: the philosophical perspective, neuroscience, linguistics, philosophy, and psychology, and what each one of those perspectives would say the nature of consciousness is. What I was so interested in was actually doing the research into that and how a neuroscientist would map consciousness compared to a philosopher. What if you had to land on a perspective, what do you opine consciousness? What is the nature of consciousness?
Yeah, well, I would say, there's a funny thing about when I originally started developing my own reality map, which I have to admit that involved consulting what some people would call one's spirit guide, or I hesitate to use terms that sound like catchphrases like higher self. And I use the term inner guru because that hasn't been popularized yet. I hope it doesn't, because then I'll have to think of something else. But what you might call an intuition, a very a wiser and more developed part of myself emerged within a few weeks after my mother passed away in 2018. And it was that was one of those you might call life-changing periods. If you've had parents die or loved ones die, you already know what this is like. Sometimes things will start developing, things will start emerging in yourself you weren't anticipating. And in this case, I was literally waking up at in the wee hours, like 3 a.m, and listening to I wouldn't call it a voice in my head, but it really did seem like me talking to myself, but it was not my everyday self talking to me. It was really, and this version of me had things to say about, and I had originally had a question in mind. It was a burning question that sometimes comes up whenever somebody passes away, which is what happens to us after we die. And because, I've had, my parents are gone, and my best friend passed away back in 2011. That's and these are the kind of losses that make you ask questions like that. What, not just what happens to me, but rather what happens to all of us. Because I mean, even if we go on living a long time, we'll continue losing people, and that, you do wonder, does anything remain? What dies with the body and what endures, if anything? This is, and much to my surprise, this voice, this inner guru, started to teach me about the nature of the structure of reality. It wasn't like a direct answer to my question, but I had a feeling that contained within this walkthrough of the structure of consciousness and reality, I would have my answer. And I've been kind of, and it's not like it would all be laid out. It was not going to be just handed to me on a platter. Mm-hmm. I would be given enough information that I could then figure it out myself, and then it could be refined further, which I guess is a creative way to do it, rather than, because a certain amount should be left up to the individual to follow up, and then you'll find out just how what you're attached to and how honest you can be with yourself. Because a lot of people, sometimes people adopt a belief system, they're doing it to use it as a security blanket to make themselves feel better. And supposing one could just set aside that need for the moment, not worry about, is this going to make me feel better about, my impending death or the death of other people? But having done that, I recognize that we have that selfhood, the experience of being alive, that's one form of consciousness that I believe arises out of other forms of consciousness. That is to say, one of the things that the inner guru told me about was what is called the multidimensional ecosystem of consciousness. Now, you could abbreviate that MEC for short, but the concept of an ecosystem, at least, is very familiar. Mm-hmm. That it is a chain of relationships linking all life forms and the environment that supports them. And that the characteristic of it is that it is completely self-regulating. The ecosystem requires no supervision. Life just generates life, and it exchanges energy to stay alive. And some of these exchanges, a lot of the exchanges are involuntary, at least on the level of biology, creatures consuming other creatures. It's not always, sentient creatures that are getting eaten, but whatever is going on usually involves exchanges. Mm-hmm. And that all of it is made of consciousness, ultimately, and it all comes from the same source. Now, the remarkable thing is that when we look at nature, that is, in a sense, you could say that's the way of nature. And it includes us. We're, like a small part of it. And, you could have a complete worldview based just upon that. However, the fact is that the dynamics are basically not human. And that means that it does not have, not only does it not need supervision, it also doesn't require ethics. Ethics is a uniquely human thing. It does not exist elsewhere in nature. It would just get in the way. Mm-hmm. And later on, my inner guru clued me in about another concept that goes alongside it, or it is enmeshed with the ecosystem of consciousness, which is the hierarchy of creators. Now, the whole notion of a hierarchy of creators would naturally set off alarm bells for somebody who'd grown up in Western religion and had been hoping to get away from anything that sounded like some kind of oppressive power structure in the cosmos. Oh, God, give me a break. But it's like monarchy all over again, just extending it up into the and but I couldn't just dismiss it. It's not just, and I don't believe it is just some egregore, but I do think it, conceptually, it's kind of, maybe the problem is that we have to use language to try to describe these things, and part of what we're really trying to describe is beyond words, and that's So in a sense, our reality mapping has to incorporate the fact that, yeah, some things where there's always going to be a relationship between the things that we can describe and the things we can't describe with words. Just as then there is also the relationship between what we know and what we don't know. The unknown is always going to be there. You can either be dismissive of it and pretend it's not there, which I think is a mistake, or you could just sort of like recognize, okay, there's this kind of dance going on at all times between the known and the unknown, between the waking life and the dream life, between, you know, the land of the living and the land of the dead, that kind of, and that's, so again, and indeed there is, I believe there's this intimate relationship between the ecosystem of consciousness and this hierarchy of creators. And it isn't necessarily just the creator and the creation, which is the classic duality that underpins Western theology. It could be that, well, Philip Dick was actually thinking along these lines when he was, when you know about his pink beam experience in 1974, yes. When yes. having this and he just, you know, his mind just sort of like blew open, and it was like, and he'd spent the rest of his life trying to figure out what happened, and he was just literally churning out reams of paper for years, and talking with theologians and reading and trying to figure out, you know, was there anything that corresponded in human experience that could explain what he was going through. And I would say that one of the, now a lot of folks would say that he got interested in Gnosticism, which I think Gnosticism is a good template. It isn't the only one. I think that was one that he took seriously, and I take it seriously, but I'm not invested in it. Because again, I don't want to get into commuted to a system that isn't amenable to modification. You know, as we are living, as we are experiencing, we are supposedly having novel experiences. Some things are going to be universal, of course, but if you go through your life in a unique way, you'll probably learn something that you can incorporate into your reality map. Reference points that you have discovered. And if your reality map doesn't, at some point, your reality map might have to be discarded, even if it does not match your observed reality. This is why I'm in favor of, I don't even worry anymore about whether we have consensus reality. It'd be more productive, especially at this time in our history, since we seem to be in a phase of disintegration anyway, to lean into the anarchy side of things and work out our own personal view, you know, and also taking into account what's already been discovered and thought about, so we don't have to reinvent things. I mean, certainly it is very helpful to look at what has already been discussed and written about, you know, from the Greeks onwards. It wasn't all a complete waste of time, I'm sure.
That was a really wonderful conversation.
It was.
Yeah.
It was. We didn't really talk too much about his blog, but from what I read, he's a great writer and really, really interesting take and subject matter. We also didn't cover any of his acting career. I would have been curious. I did not IMDb Wayne before we had him on, so I don't know what he did in the acting world.
We didn't cover anything too much. We covered a lot of things cursorily.
That works
a little bit. But yeah, it was a very wonderful, organic conversation.
Yes. I love that he lives in Northern California and is kind of, I have this weird take on things where anyone that lives in this kind of hyper woke, hyper leftist community that happens to be not necessarily of that ilk, I really respond to that because I think it's very easy to get in this culty mindset when you live in a place like San Francisco, and it's easy to kind of get swept up into that kind of cult of personality of living in that ecosystem.
Yeah. I think I was it's just been a very packed week, so I didn't get around to researching him until the last couple of days, and I was partially kind of panicked by that, but at the same time I took him to be a guy where you could just sort of freewheel it and it would go plenty of interesting places, and that's exactly what happened. He's a very kind person and has got a very interesting observations about things that are going on, much similar to the way that we look at things, but in his own way, and then takes that to a different place. So it's always good to, as he said, talk to other weirdos. Like,
yeah, and he wasn't snobby.
Not at all.
I
Not at all.
know a lot of people from that part of the world who tend to kind of have this kind of snobby attitude of like too cool for school, and know it all, been there, done it all. Yeah. And he approaches the subjects that he's writing about with curiosity and very much a sense of earnestness and humbleness that I respond really well to.
Yeah, I agree.
And I felt very excited once we started talking. Anytime, and this has happened a couple of times with people where it's almost felt like they were reading my mind, where they said something that was either something that we had just discussed right before the interview, or they start the conversation off on a foot that is the foot I wanted to start the conversation off with. So that's always exciting because I'm like, wow, this is great. There's some synergy happening.
Yeah, and it was one of those conversations that just kind of came out of the gate running. Like, it didn't start. Usually it's like there's a little before talk, chitter chatter, and then like, okay, you want to get into the conversation? Let's do it. And then I just shoot off the first question, and then it can go wherever, or I can go down my line of questions. But it just kind of hit the ground running, and I never really asked much of anything on my question list. And that's always a sign to me of a good conversation that doesn't it never gets to the point where there's an awkward silence. So you go, and then you end up asking something that has nothing to do with what you just got done talking about. This very organically flowed from one subject to another. And it's always a good sign too, when I'm constantly scribbling down notes. You didn't even have your notebook this time.
I didn't. It's over there, and I just forgot to reach for it.
You didn't need it.
I'm always thinking of different ways that we can improve or add different dimensions to what we're doing. And this was one of those conversations where I was thinking this would be so cool to be in the same room with Wayne. And this is going to sound super cheesy, but like cook or do something like cook a meal with him and talk while we're cooking, and then sit down and eat a meal. Or, I like the idea of taking someone like Wayne or Jerry Marzinski or, myriad, Diana Pasolka, people that we've spoken to that have such a wide volume of interests and knowledge, and putting them in a different context, like kind of a dinner party type of a context, and then having a dialogue in that kind of a context. And he would be a great person for that, because he seems like the type of person who would never be short of interesting conversation, interesting dialogue, something that you could talk about, what he does for fun, how he hangs out, like what are the things that he does outside of writing and research. And I always feel a little kind of nostalgic about those periods of my life when I was able to have dinner parties with people, and it was an interesting group of people. And there haven't been many, there's been phases of life where that's happened. And it's always really fun to do that. And I miss that. I miss having, this very disparate group of people come together, and then kind of sitting people together that have really nothing in common, and then just kind of sitting back and seeing what happens with that. And so in my perfect world of the podcast, it would be great to have this as kind of like a tour or a traveling road show where we did that, where we went to different guests' homes and hung out with them for a night, and
or an uncomfortably long amount of time, like 2 weeks. Like, say we're just going to stay 2 or 3 days and then go, well, I mean, thank you so much for your hospitality. Would it be out of place to ask maybe if we could just stay to the end of the week and then just keep postponing it?
Or just say, I've already put in a change of address.
There's a guy that I ran across when I was doing research for the upcoming, I don't know when that's going to happen now since it got rescheduled, the Ada Akpala interview, this guy named Adam Coleman, and he does a podcast that I am not recalling the name of right now, but it is going to his guest's house and having a meal while they're talking. So it's kind of the same thing. They didn't cook, but it was prepared, and that's where they started the interview, was with the meal. Yeah, it's a good idea. It's a great idea.
I just think there's ways to morph what we're doing into the other areas of our interest, which is filmmaking and cooking shows for me.
Connecting with real people. I think that's what it's about, really, is what it's about. Like, I do believe there's some community establishment going on here.
Yeah.
Especially after the last 3 years, but I think it's important that it translates into the real 3D realm.
Yes.
I mean, it's important to make psychological and spiritual connections outside of that, but I think meeting face to face and exchanging that energy that way is ideal, the most ideal way of doing it.
Yeah, I mean, I one of the things I love about the Lord of the Rings films is the bar scenes. I know that sounds so just like non sequitur, but these moments where they meet Gandalf in a pub somewhere, and they're having this low toned conversation. I just love it, and I love the idea of doing that, of meeting up with people in comfortable environments and just kind of seeing where the conversation goes, where it's not kind of this formal thing of like, we have questions, they answer the questions. It's just, there's some different alchemy when it's a face-to-face thing and you're actually speaking to someone in a place they feel comfortable.
Truthers in cars getting absinthe. Sort of like that. Only much more long form.
Sure. Yeah, that works. That's fine. Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, although that wouldn't be my substance of choice,
or
but
DMT, or
sure, not much talking there.
Smoking a blunt.
Yeah, sure.
So we can when we have the budge and the time to do this, and I will have breaks throughout my academic educational career, it would be great to do that, like to take a road trip and go to Colorado or go to New Mexico or go to some of these places where there are a few of our people, go to Texas and see Emily, and just go to different places and hang out with the people I consider our people.
Yeah.
And but be in their environment as opposed to this thing that we do, which I love, by the way.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would be definitely something to move towards.
Yeah.
Sure.
And I just read some silly meme that said writing it down is 50% of manifesting something. So I feel the same about saying it, like just saying it out loud. This is what we want to do. Yeah. And this kind of makes it puts it on the radar of the universe, man.
Yeah, I totally agree. There was it was also one of those conversations where the guest has a lot to say and the roller coaster moves so quickly that sometimes it's hard to, there's lots of things you want to comment on, but either they get thrown to the wayside or you just move on to bigger and better things. And there were so many corridors that I wanted to detour into, but I think that will come with further conversations, which I definitely foresee having with Wayne. So
yeah,
we're holding you to it, Wayne.
Yeah, I love talking about, especially stuff that I'm studying. I love talking about neuroscience and consciousness and what the nature of that is, because for as sophisticated as the scientific method is and scientific exploration is, science still has not answered these very basic questions, like what is reality, what is consciousness, how are these things, how do these things manifest in the brain? Like we're still mapping so much. And so that's a very interesting corridor to explore and examine. But even going into kind of the historical aspects of paganism and ritual and magic and how all of that morphed and was stamped out by religion and how the church was involved. I just took a class in a women's studies class. It's very much about that and how that shift happened. And so we could have spoken for 2 hours about that one subject because there's so much rich terrain when it comes to that lore. And especially in pre-modern Europe, there was so much activity with the church and the invention of the printing press, and how before that, if you wanted to read the Bible, you couldn't. You had to go to church, and the church was basically the arbiter of any religious text, and it was really based on someone's interpretation. And so I just find that very fascinating. And we could have delved deeper into movies and Wayne's interest in film and the aspects of filmmaking and writing that have really excited him and the direction that he's gone in his blog. I would highly recommend that you check his blog out because he's got some really great posts.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, the address will be in the episode notes. So for sure. He, I think he just started it within the last 3 or 4 months too. And he's only been on, the only ones I've heard him on podcast wise are Aeon Byte, Grimerica, and one other one that I'm not thinking of right now. So yeah, it's like he just hit on the scene, but he's such a wealth of information and he's obviously has a lot of experience under his belt. So I look forward to hearing more stories from Wayne.
Yeah, we have to make a pilgrimage to Canada to see Graham and Darren. That would be definitely on the list of people to interact with that we love, and we love their work and what they're doing. And
interview Darren while he's dressing a deer. Or cleaning one of his guns.
Sure, I'm in.
Yeah.
I'm in.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good times.
Great taste.
Potentially.
Less filling. Okay, on that note, if you would like to get a hold, first of all, thank you so much for devoting your precious attention to listening to this or watching this podcast. It means a lot to us. Hopefully you were able to get something positive, or that it sets your brain in motion in a way that maybe you hadn't explored before. Anything good. That's what we're aiming for. So thank you all so much for listening, and thank you those on Locals and Patreon for helping to support this podcast. You're very much appreciated. If you'd like to contact us for guest suggestions or recipes or whatever, gossip, Hollywood gossip, the Melt podcast at protonmail.com, or
you can always reach me at hunter-muse at protonmail.com.
Thank you so much for watching or listening. We love you.
We do.
Goodbye.
Meow.